Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. This morning we will move to the next chapter in the book. Actually, it's chapter 44. It's a very interesting name. The name of the chapter is Idolatry and its Attractions. So it's probably a topic that we wouldn't normally discuss or we wouldn't normally talk about it, idolatry. But I thought it would be interesting for us to talk a little bit about it and see what are the modern aspects of idolatry, if any. So the way that I would like to discuss the topic is, as part of this class, one of my goals is also to introduce you to different books that I think are important and different books that I think are relevant for us in our modern Jewish world. And this is one of the books. It's called Jewish Renewal. It was written by Michael Lerner. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Jewish Renewal and Michael Lerner himself a little later during the class when we get to the book. So I photocopied some parts of the book that I would like you and us to discuss this morning, and they are connected, of course, to the topic of idolatry. Okay? So I would like to start with a verse from the book of Psalms. Here you go. This is the chapter that we will be studying today. It's very short. It's only one page, but it's two-sided. So the way I would like to start the discussion today is first trying to understand how the Torah or how the Tanakh understands idolatry. And you probably remember the story of Abraham. We are reading Lech Lecha this week. Remember how he became to the idea of one God when, the Midrash, right? Mm-hmm. That his father left him in charge of the idols, and then the father went out of the idol store, and Abraham was in charge, and he said, wow, this is impossible. These idols, there's nothing they can do here. So he started to smash every idol, and then he left the stick on the hand of the biggest one, right? And then the father came back and says, what is this mess? Who did all of this, right? And Abraham says, well, look at him. The biggest one did all this mess. And the father says, it's impossible. The idols don't walk, the idols don't speak, the idols don't... No. So Abraham tells his father, listen to what you're saying, right? And that's how Abraham discovered the faith in one God. That's very nice to tell to preschool kids. Right? And I tell that to preschool kids.
That's how I learned about it.
Probably when you were in first or second grade, I hope. But I think that behind that, there is a very powerful message. And behind the notion and the idea of idolatry, there is a very powerful message for us as modern Jews. And that's what I would like us to discuss today. But in order to do that, we need to first understand or try to understand how idolatry is portrayed or how idolatry is understood in the Tanakh. And probably this is the most famous verse that is connected to the notion of idolatry. It's from the book of Psalms 115. And we read this or we sing this as part of the Hallel. So when we are on the holidays, when we're on Rosh Chodesh, we read this this chapter from the book of Psalms. It says here, their idols are the work of men's hands. They have mouths but cannot speak. Similar to what Abraham told his father, right? So probably that midrash is based on these verses here. So the idols have mouths and cannot speak, eyes but cannot see. They have ears but cannot hear, noses but cannot smell. Those who fashion them, all who trust in them, shall become like them. So how are the idols regarded here? How would you translate it to a modern interpretation of what idols are in the eyes of the Tanakh? What would you say? Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, so it feels to me like it's saying they are not just powerless, but they lack the qualities of true godliness, of vision and of understanding. understanding. So if that's what you're going after, those things are the things it's like the falseness of values that are antithetical to the Torah, really.
Good. And it's interesting that we have more chairs.
It's okay. I'll
Okay.
stand.
No, you don't have to stand.
You know.
Excellent. So godliness, right? That's the okay. And also, I think that here it's a very concrete description of idols. It's a very physical description, right? So
Right.
because they cannot speak, because they cannot hear, because they cannot smell, there is nothing they can do in this world, right? And they are not like our God,
Right.
who, regardless of this anthropomorphical description, right? We know that God interacts with human beings, interacts with the world, and is the one who is leading the world. But idols, opposed to God, there's no way they could lead anything in this world. There's no way that they could lead anything by themselves, right? So that's the so. Therefore, if you worship idols, what you're doing is you're wasting your time. If you're worshiping idols, it's like worshiping nothing, because there is no way that they could respond to you. There's no way that they can hear your prayers. Unlike our God, who, if you pray faithfully to God, we hope that God will answer our prayers. Sometimes that answer is different from what we are expecting, but we hope that God will answer.
It is in essence, a principle of the faith, of our faith, that God has no form,
Mm-hmm.
is ineffable,
Mm-hmm.
and idols are the exact opposite. It is not something that we understand religiously,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to others that make those shapes and
Right.
believe that they have some ability to control our destiny, and that is so antithetical. It's always seemed to me to Jewish teaching. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
No, you're right.
But,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this is a little bit simple. I have ears.
No, of course. But it's interesting, because what you're saying, your train of thought was the same of Maimonides, believe it or not.
That's
because
where it comes from.
Oh, wow.
Maimonides
Wow,
got it.
that's
Well, or you got
He got it.
in a previous life maybe. But he says it's impossible to describe God by a positive, by his or her positive attributes, right? So the only way that we could describe God is by saying what God is not, right? So there's no form, there's no shape, there's no beginning and end, there's no, right? But at the same time, he says we have to use some human terminology in order to describe God, because if we don't do it, we cannot grasp or understand, or speechless, right? So we have to use some human terminology in order to describe God, to make sense to us. If not, there's no way we could describe what God is or isn't.
I've never completely understood that,
What?
frankly. That we have to sort of, as you put it, I can't say it.
Anthropomorphize,
God in order to understand it. We're taught that as kids.
But if not, how would you describe God?
I'm
If
not
it's
sure.
not in human terms or in human categories.
That's right. So it's beyond human comprehension. Is really what.
Well, interestingly, the Kabbalah, for example, they say that God is the Ein Sof, right?
Yes.
There's no end or limit or boundaries to God, right? And there's no other description than that. God is beyond any way to characterize it or to define it. It's the Ein Sof. There's no Sof. There's no end or boundaries or limit to it. Okay? But let's move on a little bit, because I would like to contextualize that in a modern setting. And please turn over the page. It's on page 296. The modern world, how it says here. It says, many people who conceive of idolatry as the worship of statues and totem poles assume that it no longer exists. And let me tell you something. When I discuss this with my Mercas students or my high school students, it's very easy to get to that common place saying, well, idolatry today is, pop singers and cell phones and money. Right? If you ask a person on the street, how would you describe modern idolatry today? They would say, well, pop singers, and you can see how they build these statues of pop singers, and they have stars on the walkways in Hollywood with their names and pictures, and that's sort of a modern idolatry, right? Or money is modern idolatry. Or so I don't want to get into that commonplace. I would like to try to show you something different that is connected to idolatry, and that's why I want to see it from the perspective of Jewish renewal and what Michael Lerner wrote in his book. So I think idolatry still exists. And yes, maybe it's related to a pop singer or to a musical band or to this sports person, right? But let me try to show you a different way how idolatry can be perceived in our modern world. It says here, from Judaism's perspective, however, idolatry occurs when one holds any value higher than God and morality. And I found that very interesting. When you have something that you regard higher than God and morality, that could potentially be part of modern idolatry. Okay? And I don't want to get into details here because I didn't like the examples here. So that's why I wanted to share with you another example. And to do that, I chose this book for this morning, and let me share with you a little bit about Jewish renewal. I took this from the internet, but I think it's important for us to. So when we think about modern branches in Jewish tradition, we think about Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. Some people would probably mention the Reconstructionist movement. But there are many other movements that we would normally not mention in our analysis of modern Judaism. Movements such as humanistic Judaism. By the way, we have a humanistic congregation right here in Fairfield. It's not in Fairfield, it's in Westport. And there Aleph movement, and then this Jewish renewal movement that is also very interesting. So let me share with you a few lines that I copied here about Jewish renewal. It says here, it's a recent movement in Judaism which endeavors to reinvigorate modern Judaism with Kabbalistic, Hasidic, and musical practices. Specifically, it seeks to reintroduce the ancient Judaic traditions of mysticism, meditation, gender equality, and ecstatic prayer to synagogue services. So when you go to a Jewish renewal service, you would hear a lot of meditation, you would hear a lot of music and nigunim and singing and dancing, right? And some people love it. It's not for me necessarily. And as I know for some people around the table, I like more and more, not the traditional, but, in the middle, the sweet middle between a very extreme, Jewish renewal service and probably a very extreme modern Orthodox service. I would like to find a middle between both, integrating, the traditional service with more singing, music, probably dancing, and musical instruments that could enhance the spirituality and the taste of the service. So it says here, Jewish renewal in its most general sense has its origin in the North American Jewish countercultural trends of the late 60s and early 70s. During this period, groups of young rabbis, academics, and political activists founded experimental chavurot. So the beginning of the Jewish renewal is tied to this idea of chavurot, meaning small group of people who would gather together and celebrate the holiday, celebrate Shabbat, or discuss different Jewish topics. By the way, we have a very successful program of chavurot here at Bethel. We have a number of chavurot that meet for Shabbat, meet for the holidays, meet to study together, and it's very nice to see a group of friends who gather together, and around this table we have a number of people who belong to different Chaburot. It says here, initial Chaburot. Okay, so others formed. So it started as Chaburot, but then it formed as communities within the urban and suburban Jewish establishment. Founders of the Chaburot included the liberal political activist Arthur Waskow. Is the name familiar to you?
Mm-hmm.
Waskow. Michael Strassfeld,
Mm-hmm.
who wrote this Jewish catalog, which became very famous. And Zalman Schechter Shalomi.
Yeah.
Also, I believe he lives in Colorado, no? Or where is
Does he still live?
Still alive?
I don't
Or
know.
he lived in.
We met him in 1962 at Camp Ramah.
He's still
Oh.
alive.
Really?
No, I
Really?
don't think so. So these are the founders of the Jewish Renewal movement, and then Michael Lerner is also one of the most important rabbis within this movement. And as you probably know, it says here is an American political activist, the editor of Tikkun, a progressive Jewish interfaith magazine, and he is also a rabbi in Aleph, Alliance for Jewish Renewal. Okay, so he wrote this interesting book that is called Jewish Renewal, Path to Healing and Transformation. And I would like us to study a little bit from it. At the time we have 20 minutes, so that should be enough time for us to read or to study 2 or 3 pages from his book. I can tell you right now. It was written 1994. 1994. Okay, so again, I would like us to focus on this idea of modern idolatry in connection to when you regard, it says here, when one holds any value higher than God and morality. Okay, so that was my leitmotif for this morning. So let's say, it says here, page 132. You see what it says here? The prophets were the first creators. You have it there? Okay. Debbie, would you like to read? Go ahead.
The prophets were the first creators of the Jewish renewal movement.
By the way, that's very nice to say, right? Because when you're creating a new movement or when you're creating a new trend in Judaism, you ascribe it to someone who was very important. So probably there is no better way to say we are the best Jewish modern movement because the prophets followed it and they were the first Jewish renewals in our Jewish world. Let's go and figure that out. Okay, well,
To be prophets.
right. So, go ahead.
But were they really renewing some previously existing reality? Probably not. It's doubtful that the Jewish people had ever actually embodied and lived by the fullest meaning of the revolutionary tradition in Judaism. Its injunctions to love your neighbor as yourself, to love the stranger, to pursue justice, were always heard by people who were hearing other and conflicting messages at the same time. People who inevitably found it difficult fully to embody these demands.
Right, okay, so the prophets were probably not the first people who made a huge social revolution within the Jewish people in the world. There were others who were very sensitive to the needs of other people, right? So you have Abraham, for example, who was sensitive to Sodom and Gomorrah. You have other people who were in the kings, right, and in the Bible, who were sensitive to the needs of the orphan, the widow, and the stranger, right? So we have the Bible itself that is telling us about it. So what he's saying is that many people felt that need and were compelled to help those who were in need. Okay, let's skip to the next paragraph. Inevitably?
The next part of
Inevitably? Yeah, the following part.
Inevitably, as with every subsequent attempt at renewal, including this one, their interpretations were also in part redefinitions of the tradition, selectively choosing what was important, downplaying the rest.
By the way, that's exactly what every single Jewish movement does, even the Orthodox, right? Because you know that within Jewish tradition, we can find many different ways how to follow a commandment, right? So it is related to a life cycle event, and it's related to the observance of Shabbat, it's related to observance of the holidays. You are always interpreting Jewish tradition in a way that you are choosing from this very extensive corpus of laws, what is relevant or not for you, and what is relevant and not for your interpretation of Judaism. So even Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Jewish Renewal, everyone is doing exactly the same here.
In fact, it's precisely this process of selective reinterpretation and redefinition that is a Jewish tradition.
Correct.
But every generation feels threatened and resented, feels that it's aimed against them, identifies with the accepted practices of Judaism, and wildly resists the new effort at renewal. The first such cycle began with the priests of ancient Israel, who were confronted by prophets who denounced the way the current ritual practices were being separated from what they took to be the essence of Judaism.
Right? So the Beit HaMikdash, that was tameh, that was impure. And that's the time of Hanukkah, right? The re-inauguration of the temple. Some say that the Hashmoneans, right, that was exactly their goal, to purify the temple after they felt that those who were conducting the service there were really doing not the proper job back then. So it's interesting to see how this process of renewal played a major role in Jewish history since its very beginning.
They were appointed by the Syrians.
Mm-hmm.
The Kohen Gadol was appointed by the Syrians, so how could he be in line with the remainder of the Jewish people?
Correct. So that was the political debate back then.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It was an appointment, but not necessarily a kosher one.
Strafe appointment.
Right? Yeah, correct. And that's behind the story of Hanukkah, that we don't necessarily talk about it as much as we should. And I know that Phil loves that time of Jewish history.
At the time, I never heard about it while growing up.
Yeah,
Right.
I know.
Most
And I remember your Dvar Torah, and I remember it very well. It was very nice. It was very nice. So
That's
we.
why I gave it.
Okay, go ahead a little bit.
Is this not the fast that I have chosen to relieve the oppressed, cries Isaiah, proclaiming the word of God? To Isaiah, it's obvious that the whole of Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement, Judaism's most solemn ritual occasion, is a farce unless it's reflective of a deeper social and individual transformation that leads people to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, untie the bonds of servitude, create a society based on caring and responsibility for the other. Well, the answer to Isaiah's, is this not a fast, might be, excuse me, but no, that wasn't exactly how you put it in the Torah. As a matter of fact, when you stated that we should fast, you didn't quite mention that the real fasting was to end oppression.
Interesting, right? Mm-hmm. And this is very interesting because what's the real meaning of Yom Kippur and the fast itself? Is it really to not eating and drinking for 25 hours, or is it, as the prophet is saying to us here, is to raise that awareness that there are other people who are really suffering here?
That has always resonated with me.
With me too.
Because, you see, I don't want to point people out, but people make this big deal about fasting. And that's fine. I have no problem with that. I don't do it myself, but I have no problem with that. But that's not the purpose of it. I mean, the purpose of it is to create a higher awareness of the suffering of others,
right,
that we should all be aware of. And this is sort of the kick in the backside to do it. But I think that thought is absolutely lost. And we read it on Yom Kippur. Is this not the fast that I...
Mm-hmm. That's the Haftorah for Yom Kippur.
Yeah. And I don't get it. I just don't know why it doesn't resonate more.
The
fast is not that important.
If you ask me, I think that there should be a blend or a mix between ritual and justice and social justice, if you want. I think that ritual is not enough, and social justice or that social struggle for a better society is not enough by itself. I think that in a certain point you have to try to find that link between both.
Well, I think it's important that you have some structure, and that's, that is certainly flows from that. The fast is part of the structure. But there's a deeper meaning, and it seems to me that a lot of us just don't look at the deeper meaning.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Which is what I think it's all about.
Yep.
But I think that, our tradition here of collecting groceries for Operation Hope
yes.
is that connecting point to remind people what we're really supposed to be thinking about on this holiday.
And by the way, when we put up the sign right there, and David does it every year, this is the verse that we use.
That's right. That's
right?
right.
This is the verse that we
Right.
use,
Right.
trying to link the ritual
Right.
with the social justice component. Okay, let's skip because we only have 10 minutes. So let's skip to the last paragraph in short. Okay, because I want us to focus a little bit on that paragraph and then the next one.
In short, what the prophets saw was that Jews were becoming like other nations, becoming internally corrupt, abandoning the special message.
Both, right? So this struggle for the political versus the spiritual, and then what is the real message? Is it only the ritual, or is ritual accompanied with this struggle and this fight for social justice?
The prophets were confronting an issue that would come up over and over again in Jewish history. Do all these fine revolutionary ideals have any application in the real world? For the realists of ancient Israel, these pious sentiments were very nice as ideals, but could have little to do with daily life in the real world.
Right. So, Jim, your words are beautiful, but they are not part of the real world, right? So Michael Lerner is saying
Yeah.
it's very nice to think about the oppressed
Right.
and the naked and the hungry and the widow and the orphan, blah, 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 but they don't have, real application in the real world.
Yes, they do.
So let's see. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay, we'll see. That's why we're here.
For the prophets, the real world was an idolatrous world. The essential nature of idolatry is to see only what is before you, to be unable to see the potential for transformation, and to refuse to bear witness to the power in the universe that makes possible that transformation.
Beautiful.
In this-
So what is idolatry here? Let's read it again because
Yeah.
it's worth every single word here. It says here,
The essential nature of idolatry is this: to see only what is before you, to be unable to see the potential for transformation.
So stop there. So what is idolatry? What is modern idolatry? It says here,
I think it's
to see only what is before you, to be unable to see the potential for transformation. Meaning, when you see that, or when you feel that it is impossible to transform this world, when you see that there is people who are naked, when you see people who are naked, people who are hungry, people who are downtrodden, people who don't have a place, people who are discriminated, and you see injustice, and you think that that's the only reality that is in this world, and that there is no way or there's no possibility to transform it, and that's the real world, that's idolatry.
So we all have to become activists.
Yep. Or if not activists, at least to raise awareness of what is important and how a Jew should respond to those challenges. Because according to Michael Lerner, fighting idolatry or being a non-idolater, do you have an idea like that?
That works.
Or, it works well?
Yeah.
Is that an English idea?
Oh boy.
Or a believer.
Not being an idolater.
No being an idolater would be to recognize the power of transformation, being to recognize the power that you can transform the world and that the real world exists, but there is an ideal world that we should be aiming for.
And that you can work to make change.
Correct.
but by using the capital P, he's suggesting that God is the source of the transformation.
Correct.
Right?
But we are the ambassadors and we are
The agents.
agents of God in this world. The higher power works through us. The higher power works through us. And I think this is beautiful because this gives us a different perspective of what modern idolatry is. It's not about, sportsmen, it's not or person. It's not about singers, it's not about bands, it's not about money. It's about how can we transform this real world that could be better.
This next line is really good.
Yep,
too.
we're gonna get there. Go ahead.
Okay. In this, and to refuse to bear witness to the power in the universe that makes possible that transformation. In this sense, Jewish renewal is the functional equivalent of the struggle against idolatry. It's the attempt to refocus Jewish attention away from the real world and towards a truer reality that encompasses the possibility of possibility. Okay?
So what do you think? We're going to stop there. What do you think?
Oh, I like the next line better.
Oh, okay, go ahead. So,
The prophets
I mean, we could read the entire book if you want,
Right,
but we don't have
What the
time.
prophets also understood was that when the mind is dulled to the possibility of transformation and the consciousness is habituated to cruelty and evil, the sensitivity to the grandeur of the universe is lost. For the prophets, one cannot recognize God when one is participating in an oppressive social order, so that ritual automatically becomes merely ritual, rote repetition that cannot move us towards the consciousness of awe and celebration.
Nice, right? So again, that balance between ritual and social justice, and the continued search for a better world, I think it's part of modern idolatry. And I love this because I think that when we talk about ancient and modern idolatry, ancient idolatry was just connected to God, right? And when you go to the Talmud and when you go to the Torah and the Tanakh, you see that it's more concerned about the power or the lack of power of God against regular gods that were in the world back then, and how you worship those gods, or Adonai, our God. But I feel that the modern idolatry has to do with how can we transform not God, but the world that we are living in. And modern idolatry would be focusing on values or concepts and ideas that would be higher than focusing on God. And I think that here the idea is that we have the power to transform our world. And that would be serving God, because God, as it says here with the capital P, is the power that would impel us to change and to make this world a better world.
Without something cynical, is that a truer reality?
Yeah, but what do you think is cynical?
Well, I mean, to bring it towards a truer reality. Is that reality to that vision of a better world?
Well, what is true reality, right? Is there a true reality? I mean, reality is different for you.
Table, that's true, and that's real.
But the concept of idolatry is essentially easy. It's the easy way to an end. There's an idol, you worship the idol, you hope you're going to get a result, you feel good about it, and go on your merry way. We're saying something a lot different. That you've really got to think about the ritual that you're following. Why are you doing it? There's a reason for it, and it's not just because it's the ritual. There's a deeper meaning that you have to think
Correct.
about.
But I think also the challenge for the Jewish renewal movement is a reassessment of what our rituals are. Do the rituals that we engage in promote this end? And that's what I think they're saying to us, that's why they created different rituals, because the rituals that have been more traditional didn't bring them to this level of appreciation of the divine, let's
And
say.
is the ritual that we are following today bringing us to that level
Right.
of awareness and understanding of the struggle of so many people
Right.
around? Are we comfortable with the rituals that we have? I don't know, and I agree with Jim that
Yeah.
sometimes,
Going back to the
fasting
original point.
fasting for 25 hours is not enough to understand and to put yourself on the place of so many people who are struggling.
But I think it can make you realize what it's like to be hungry every day and to be
Okay.
food insecure, as they say.
Right, and you could say that Sukkot is a nice reenactment of what would it mean to live in a sukkah for 365 days a year, right? And maybe.
I think that the teenagers are not wrong when they say that people make idols of money and power, because then if somebody's pursuing making as much money no matter what the cost, or if that becomes their primary focus, that still is putting on a higher level something that shouldn't be on a higher
Yeah.
level.
The fly in the
Yep.
ointment,
Our
of
president?
course. The fly in the. Don't even talk about it. The fly
Sorry.
in the ointment, however, is that, and I just thinking about Paul Allen died yesterday.
Yeah.
Young, he was 65 years old, but he was worth $1 trillion, and he put it to some very good use.
Yeah.
I mean, the renewal of Seattle and all the, and he put it to good use. I think of Joel Smilo, who was a very wealthy guy.
Yeah.
Who was, you know what he's done? He's
Right.
fabulous things all off of Braziers. I mean, it's amazing
Yeah.
what you can do. But he couldn't have done that. That would not have happened had he not made the money.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there's a dichotomy there that's very hard to reconcile. If you don't have the money, you can't do those good things. You can do other good things that don't require you to sit down and write a check out. But, to really make that sort of...
But there are people who make a lot of money who don't do
Of course.
Of
course.
Yeah, but you're talking about the extremes.
Yes, I am.
You should be
Yes, I am.
talking about the everyday person who is not wealthy, how he approaches life, how he treats his fellow man, how he thinks
Quite,
about it.
quite so.
So
Quite
what you're
so.
saying is just for selective few. So it's really, it doesn't really apply to the average person.
No, but what it does apply to is when kids, for example, are admiring whoever it is that makes, zillions and trillions of dollars, sports stars, whatever. Unless they do something really worthwhile with it. I don't want to tell anybody else I'll spend their money. That's not my place. But if they do something good with it, then I think they're entitled to some degree of adulation.
Oh, of course.
And if not,
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
When the kids admire, people who make a lot of money, and it's something that they would like to do, you ask them, and what would you do with the money if you made it?
exactly.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
What would you do with it?
It makes
I
me
mean,
think,
LeBron James makes a lot of money as this
Right.
great.
What would you do with that?
But he
You
does
know,
something.
he
He
started-
does
he
school.
Yeah,
started a
some-
school in
yeah,
Akron,
that was
you
very
know,
nice.
And he does, and he's using his money for betterment of his community.
Yep.
but I think of years ago, we had somebody not Jewish who was working for us, and we talked to him about the Jewish value of tzedakah, and we said, go through any of our files and take a look at how much charity
Pick 10
people
Jewish names from our
Okay.
client list, and see how much they give
Yeah.
to charity in
compared
the course of
to,
the year.
Sure.
that.
To other people.
He was so
true.
surprised, but we weren't surprised.
Yeah.
Reminded, my roommate for several years was a great-grandson of Julius Rosenwald. Julius Rosenwald made his money in Sears Roebuck all over Charlotte as a
Oh,
display.
wow, yeah.
And was extremely wealthy. And what he did was created the Rosenwald schools, which today nobody has ever heard of. But the Rosenwald schools were schools throughout the South that he built with his money to educate the poor blacks. This is in the 1920s, 1930s.
Yikes.
Who did not have schools. And he made a paradigm change in their lives. It affected their lives, it affected the national, and that was putting money to very good use.
Of course.
And I mean, the man had the money, he was able to do it, but that's how he did it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a remarkable, I'm talking about, there were thousands of Rosenwald schools throughout the South.
So we have to finish, but I just want to summarize the idea behind this book and or the portion that we read, and it's that when you feel comfortable with the real world, and when you feel that the real world is the only thing that is out there, that would be modern idolatry.
Absolutely.
The power to confront that and the power to change that and to fight for a better world would be serving God, who is the source or the power that through us can work in order to make our world a better world. And I think that's a spin of modern idolatry that I found very interesting, and that's what I wanted to share with you this morning.
All right. Thank you.